I welcome one and all. Some of you have gathered here. Some of you have joined over internet. I welcome all of you to this today's beautiful evening satsang with Sri Andrew Cohen. We have the privilege of having Sri Andrew Cohen with us. He is one person who has spent a lot of effort, time, and in a dedicated way for exploring various aspects of enlightenment. He has met, interviewed, talked to many people all over the world to understand the nature of enlightenment. He founded a magazine called What is Enlightenment? So I can say he has encyclopedic knowledge of enlightenment, both width and the depth. So it is time for us to eat his head and find out and get the questions which are bugging us. Try to understand the subject of enlightenment. Let us not get into too much diversified because there are so many varieties of mechanisms, methods, systems. But whatever we want to, whatever subject we are taking up, let us get into depth. The idea is to go deeper rather than wider. You may get easily defocused by many aspects, but let's try to focus and drill deeper into the subject of enlightenment. Is that okay?
That's wonderful.
So, the way I would like this session to be, let me use that one, white one. My phone. Okay. So, on behalf of Light of Self Foundation, Atmajat Satsang, welcome to today's satsang. So, the way it will proceed is I will take up a topic, give a slight background about it, then I would request Andrew to give his views on that. Then any questions from the audience related to that topic we'll take up, drill deeper into our understanding. Is that okay for all of you?
Okay.
Is that okay?
Very good.
Okay. So let us take up the first topic, enlightenment. Enlightenment is light. Light on what? Ignorance is the darkness. Ignorance about my own nature self and ignorance about the world. This together is what we call as darkness. Getting light of wisdom into for the self, about the self and about the nature of the world is what I understand by the word enlightenment. And why do we need that? Is we go through struggle in life, strife in life. All of us are struggling. There's a stress in life. The stress comes out of the duality, seeing the difference. The experience of duality causes stress in us. This search for enlightenment from ages is to find out how we can overcome this stress in life. Can we be free from stress and strife in life and have a meaningful life on this earth? So that requires, our sages found out that the duality is the cause, duality is the problem. And fortunately, the duality is not a reality. Duality is an illusion of religion. So if you are able to understand, overcome the duality in our life, the life will experience a freedom, both mental, emotional, and intellectual level, which will open up our life for a beautiful dimension. This is my understanding of enlightenment. Now I request Andrew to give your perspective on what exactly you mean by enlightenment. Just word the enlightenment. We'll take up the word evolution and enlightenment as next step.
Very good. So my understanding of enlightenment is that it's the journey from mortality to immortality, from ignorance, as you were describing, to knowledge. So the journey from mortality to immortality is made through the awakening, the discovery of the fact that who I am is not merely the small self, the separate ego, the unique personality who's born at a particular time and place in history, in time. And that unique personal self has a narrative, has a story, has a historical narrative, which is who I am. So the profound awakening and the journey from mortality to immortality is the profound, life-changing, radical and profound, explosive recognition that who I really am is the self, which is immortal because the self, capital L, capital R, has never entered the stream of time and therefore is never going to die. The Buddha referred to the self as the deathless or the unborn or the uncreated. So this is the deepest dimension of reality and the deepest dimension of the self. And this deepest dimension of reality exists prior to the time process. So before time, before history, before the creation of the universe, there was only this unborn, inconceivable, trans-rational, pre-rational knowing that's free from mind, and free from anything that's ever happened in time. And when the self that sees itself and recognizes itself and believes itself to be a prisoner of time, recognizes that in fact it was never a prisoner of time because it was never born and never entered the stream of time. The experience for the small self is like being liberated. It's like coming out of a small prison. And it's the recognition of unimaginable freedom, unimaginable joy, unimaginable happiness, unimaginable contentment. It's the freedom from anything that's ever happened in time. And this experience can only be experienced, it can't be understood with the mind. And this releases one from the biological attachment to the body, the psychological attachment to the mind, the intellectual attachment to thinking. And it liberates one in the most profound way from the tyranny of being trapped in anything other than an immortal context. So that's a brief introduction to my understanding about what enlightenment's all about. There's also a creative dimension to all this, which we'll get into in a minute. I don't want to go into that now.
Sure. So thank you.
Yeah.
So you spoke about enlightenment as a freedom from a personal self, a personal identity, which is imprisoned in time, to go beyond, recognize its own true nature as self, which is capital S, which is beyond time, beyond space, which has never entered into stream of creation.
Exactly.
So there's a freedom. Now the question comes, if that is so, so we are speaking of a self which is transcendent, or rather beyond time and space, and individual self which is a prisoner of time, which apparently is a prisoner of time and space, we call as personal I, and a transcendent I, which I call as impersonal I. Okay. So the personal I, recognizing the impersonal nature which is beyond time and space, and experiencing freedom, is called enlightenment. That's what, to summarize what I understood. So now this recognition can happen through the mind, by the mind, using the instrument of mind, but for the self. Okay, this, who recognizes this is not the mind, but recognition happens for the self, which is actually born, or which is in time domain, which thinks it's in time domain. The self uses the instrument of mind to recognize this. So the recognition requires mind, and once the recognition happens, from mind you transcend the mind, and that state of mind is called no mind. This is my understanding. So I would like to understand, what do you say about mind to no mind? And first, is this understanding correct, that understanding, recognition happens through the mind, but for the self?
Absolutely.
Right? So ultimately, the knowledge and ignorance has to be attained through the instrument of mind, but not for the mind, it's for the self. Okay. So with this knowledge, the self recognizes itself as the impersonal I. So once that recognition happens, that is called enlightenment or freedom. So then the mind, which becomes mind, then there is a terminology called no mind. What exactly you understand by no mind?
It's very difficult to describe with language.
Okay.
It's the essence of who we always are.
Okay.
Before the universe was created, before time began.
Mm-hmm.
It's the deepest dimension of the self. It's the deepest dimension of reality itself, and it's a knowing that's empty of cognition.
Okay. So objectless.
Absolutely objects.
Objectless cognition.
Yes.
Okay. So the no mind, there is all knowing involves a subject-object relationship. The objectless knowing, where there is no object, but recognition of the self by the self, is called enlightenment, possibly. But is it no mind? An enlightened person lives in a state of no mind. There's no enlightened person to say. To say enlightened person is a sort of oxymoron or wrong. A person who is enlightened, he is no more a person, but his state of mind is called no mind state. So now Andrew says we cannot express it in words. Typically, a mind involves thoughts flowing from the past, future. So once enlightenment happens, possibly the person, the mind stays in the eternal present, which is not a flow, but being in the total presence, neither past nor future, the presence. That's possibly one understanding which I have about no mind. The second understanding of no mind is The mind, the conceptualization by the mind about the world or about the self, that drops. There's no more conceptualization. The superimposition of the concepts on the world and the self both stops. For example, the conceptualization that the world is real drops. The conceptualization that I'm a limited body, mind, and intellect drops. So the conceptualization function stops, but the functioning of the mind continues. As the body mind, as a body mind entity, that functioning continues, whereas the conceptualization drops. This conceptualization is related to something called ego or the personal identity that drops. So this is my understanding of no mind.
Yes, I very much agree. And then the reason that the dropping that you're describing happens is because with this awakening, or this, we could say it's a sinking into the depth of the ocean of being. From the perspective of the ocean of being, nothing has ever happened. The universe has never been created. God has not even begun to think about anything. The small self has never been born. Nothing has ever happened. So from the deepest perspective, there's only nothingness. And in the nothingness, there's a mysterious knowing of itself. And in the knowing of oneself or the self, there's absolute fulfillment. In that emptiness, there's perfect fullness. There's absolute perfection. And there's no mind. Because there's no this and there's no that. There is no other. There's nothing to know and there's nothing to understand, because one is everything already in every single moment. But at the same time, from the perspective of the part of the self that has been born and has entered the stream of time, that is perceived to be existing on the surface of this depth, there's a cognitive process that's still continuing. But now the cognitive process is happening in the knowledge of the freedom I've been describing. So that cognitive process is no longer trapped in the ignorance of being trapped in time or in history. But because there's still access to this cognition, the experience of cognition from this perspective of the freedom of the self is experienced as a kind of marvelous and divine creativity, a marvelous and divine aspect for reflection. The self is able to reflect upon itself using this great gift of the mind, without the mind being trapped in relativity. So the mind becomes then a friend of the self with a capital S, and a very gifted, inspired communicator, because the mind now becomes a liberated vehicle through which this divine transcendental knowledge can be known, can be transmitted into the relative world of time and space. And so the mystery and the secret of unconditional and profound liberation can be transmitted to all sincere seekers who want to learn the secret of freedom, of moksha, of liberation. And if they're ready, if their karma and there has ripened them to the degree that they're ready to hear this truth and also to accept it. We have to be ready to accept it, free from fear and free from doubt. If we're ready to receive it, then when it's received, like it's like a lotus flower opening, or it's just like a flower blooming, that self falls into the mystery of the uncreated in the same way that the communicator has. And the self delights in itself yet again and again and again and again, each time that happens. there's a big welcoming, infinite welcoming party of one to itself. It keeps repeating itself. So yes, the liberated cognition is a wonderful gift of enlightened awareness. And I agree with the way you described it, yeah.
Thanks. Now, coming to use the terminology, two terminologies we brought in now, enlightenment and liberation. So the word enlightenment, liberation, we use often use times separately. So enlightenment is recognition of the self nature and nature of the world, and recognizing that I am that infinite self, I am that consciousness, unborn, undying, birthless, deathless, infinite consciousness. That recognition, along with the recognition, there's a recognition that the world is just was an appearance, didn't have a substantial reality. So along with that, a deep freedom comes into picture. The freedom from three dimensions. I am the body, I am the mind, I am the intellect. As a body, I have been doer and subject to laws of karma. As a mind, I have been subject to ups and downs, emotional disturbance of the mind. As an intellect, I was bound by the knowledge and ignorance. So these three are, you get a freedom from these three while you realize your essential nature. So this particular aspect of freedom, I call it as liberation. So my question to Andrew, is your understanding of liberation same, or you have a different explanation about liberation?
No, I agree with everything you said.
Okay.
But there's another dimension I want to bring into it also.
Sure.
Which is when the universe was created, the universe, the world of time, when I say the universe, I mean the world of time and space, the entire creative process, all of evolution. This creative process, time and space, matter, energy, life, and mind, emerged from primordial, timeless, empty nothingness or being. So because this time process, because this creative process emerged from timeless, formless, empty being, in that there's the recognition that the evolving universe, the creative process, is not separate from and is one with timeless, formless, empty being, which means that time is not separate from timelessness. Form is not separate from formlessness. Mind is not separate from no mind. The emptiness of being is not separate from the fullness of creation. There's a recognition, there's the profound recognition that they are one and not two. That the singularity, the non-dual singularity, includes both being and becoming, time and timelessness, form and formlessness. So, in this understanding, there's the recognition of the fact that the creative process itself, that emerged from timeless, formless nothingness, is a very dynamic and profound expression of the very freedom of timelessness and nothingness. That the world itself, that the universe itself, the entire creative process, is a living, manifest expression, dynamic expression of the freedom of being as infinite creativity. And in this recognition, which is looking at enlightenment from a slightly different angle, awakens our understanding and appreciation of what the body is and what its function is, what the mind is and what its function is, what the personality is and what its function is, what the world is and what its function is, what nature is and what its function is. And in this recognition, there's a similar understanding that who I am is not the body, not the mind, not the unique personality or ego. It's a recognition that the body, mind, personality, and ego, in the evolutionary context, are vehicles, are empty vehicles through which this divine and creative energy and intelligence gave rise to the creative process. And there's a recognition that through this temporary emergence of the body, through the temporary emergence of the mind, through the temporary emergence of the unique personality, that divine energy and intelligence can awaken to itself, can realize itself, can recognize itself, but most importantly, can express itself. So in this context, the body, mind, personality, and the entire world and the entire creative process are manifest living expressions of divinity in form. That the matter and the energy and the life and the mind that emerge from primordial nothingness is nothingness itself in action, in and as the entire creative process. And so when there's an awakening to this process as spirit incarnate, there's the recognition that the entire universe and all the creativity that gives rise to the universe, that empowers the universe, and that indeed makes it possible for us to awaken to the singularity that gave rise to it, is divinity itself. And in this there's a profound recognition of the ultimate non-difference between nothing and something, between being and becoming, between timelessness and time, between inconceivable creativity and absolute nothingness itself. So in this we also experience a kind of release, because in this there's a release from the resistance of incarnation. It's what Sri Aurobindo called the refusal of the aesthetic. And in that there's not only an acceptance of the world and the universe and time and space and the body and the mind and the personality, but in the recognition that all of it is God or divinity in and as form, we begin to see the play of consciousness and the creative process in a very different way. And we begin to see it all as the manifestation of God in and as form. And the degree to which we recognize that, realize that, awaken to that, know that the expression of our own being begins to become a manifest expression of that truth. And this is very liberating and inspiring, because it gives us the ultimate reason to exist as the body, mind, and personality that we already are. But now not in ignorance of our true nature, but in a divine and exalted recognition of it. And then we can not only accept the fact that we exist, we can actually delight in it. So I see these are two perspectives that are not separate. They're complementary. They're two different sides. As my guru would say, they're two different sides of the same coin.
Yeah, beautiful. So what you communicated is the form and formless. The form is formless and formless is form. The nothingness is everything and everything is nothing. The emptiness is fullness and fullness is emptiness. This is actually complete realization. So in ancient Indian wisdom, we say, I am consciousness, that what they say is Aham Brahmasmi, then all this is consciousness, Sarvam Khalvida Brahma. All this is manifestation of consciousness, Sarvam Khalvida Brahma. So that actually is both the real recognition of the self and recognition of the universe as a manifestation of that is what is realization. Just recognition that Aham Brahmasmi is not complete. Just recognition Sarvam Khalvida Brahma is not complete. The realization has to be complete in the sense Aham Brahmasmi and Sarvam Khalvida Brahma. I am real, I am consciousness, and all this is a manifestation of consciousness. Form is formless, emptiness is fullness. So that becomes the total, the complete realization. So then he spoke of creative process where the various forms are born, the forms grow, and the forms are dissolved, and newer forms are created, eventually leading to higher and higher level of complexity of life form. The life form eventually recognizes the self. That is the universe or the consciousness is recognizing itself through us. So that gives us a position in the whole grand scale of a so-called the universe. So we can be happy that we have some place there. Even though we feel very small, tiny particles. So in grand scale of the universal scale, we have some place. Okay, we have place in terms of recognizing this self with ourselves. We are actually like a sort of mirror. Yeah, your questions?
Now, you talked about dimension of creative expression. You can keep adding more dimensions.
Sorry?
Like you can keep adding more dimensions, such as love. Love is another dimension, right? If that, can you keep adding more dimensions? If you look at the word, you can keep adding more. There's no limit. You can, I took an example. You can keep adding love as a dimension. So
creativity is one dimension. There are multiple dimensions: love, intelligence, then energy. So is the creativity includes all the dimensions, or each dimension is you to add?
Creativity includes all dimensions, but I think I don't think love is separate from the essence of creativity itself and what's compelling the universe to exist. In my own deepest moments of realization, there was the recognition that love in a way that we can't ordinarily think about it. It's transrational. It's a transrational knowing of an absolute principle, the nature of which is experienced as a kind of love that is all-consuming. It's the nature of the ultimate mystery that lies beyond life and death. So I don't think we can in any way separate love from creativity, from higher and lower dimensions of complexity and all this, because love is the ultimate nature of all of it. And the direct realization of that truth changes everything in us. It removes all doubt. But it has to be realized. It has to be directly experienced. But only when it's directly realized, directly experienced, it destroys the mind in the best possible way. And only in light of that kind of depth of the experience of love, of that depth, that intensity, the mind is destroyed, the ego is destroyed, doubt is destroyed, and that's it. That's not a thought, it's an experience.
So when ego drops, automatically love grows.
Yes. But the reason that what we're talking about, the reason that what we're calling love is flowing, because that's the nature of reality at that kind of primordial depth. That's what is. But to see the word love, I always feel hesitant to use that word, because when we use the word love, we say, I love my father, I love my mother, I love my children, I love my pets, I love pizza. And the thing is, what we're speaking about here, it's a completely different dimension of experience. The direct knowledge of this kind of love is inherently transformative because of how all-consuming and absolute. Because this is a recognition of the absolute. It's not relative love; it's absolute love, and it really does change everything. And when anybody experiences that kind of depth, as I was just saying, their mind disappears. Literally. And in that there's submission, spontaneous submission. And then there's the experience of what, as Jesus said, not my will, but thy will be done. And it's choiceless. It's a choiceless submission. And in that there's only that, nothing else.
You have a question?
Yeah. So you described light enlightenment as a journey of self, the small self to the self. My question is, why should there be enlightenment? Why God forgot himself or did not know himself? And then what is the purpose of all this? This self going from unknown to the known, nothing to everything, being everything or nothing. Why did come into the duality and then come back into the?
Well, I have an educated guess. So nobody knows for sure, but there have been educated guesses. So my educated guess goes something like this, and I think it's similar to what we hear in Vedanta. So this is my metaphysical speculation, my metaphysical fantasy, which ultimately means nothing. So you have to understand that this is just simply a anthropomorphic. You know what anthropomorphic means? Human. It means a humanized perspective on cosmic truths that can't really be understood with a human mind. And knowing that, we say, I'm going to try and understand it anyway. So we admit that our helplessness and our incapacity from the very beginning, but we work with what we've got, which is which is ourselves. So my understanding is, I wanted to understand this. I said, well, we have to imagine what is it like to be God. And want to know why because the question is, why does something exist versus nothing? Why does the universe exist? And from a certain point of view, and the point of view that Prabhuji and I started discussing tonight, from the deepest perspective of timelessness, formlessness, and pure being, the universe doesn't exist, was never existed. And yet apparently it does exist because we're having the discussion about the fact that it doesn't exist in a space, in a place, in bodies and minds and personalities that seem to exist in time and in space and in form. So apparently, the relative world exists in its own context. So in any case, so let's try and imagine what it would be like to be God before the universe was created. So based on my experience and my understanding tells me that God was existing in perfect bliss and emptiness and fullness, absolute contentment, indescribable joy, unimaginable freedom, for countless billions of eons of no time, eternally in eternity, having nothing, knowing nothing, and being no one. forever. So it's this concept or this truth about eternity, the eternal nature of being itself. We have to imagine what would it be like to do nothing forever in absolute perfect joy, perfect equanimity, perfect happiness, perfect contentment. So what I think happened, and of course I don't know what happened, but what my imagination, what my creative imagination and intuitive human intelligence tells me what happened, is that if I was doing nothing forever, literally for eternity, if I'd done nothing, and I was God, and I remember being God is different than being human, because if you're God, you're indestructible and you're fearless. You're not a mortal human being who can be hurt or wounded or traumatized. So as that immortal, indestructible being, if I've been doing absolutely nothing whatsoever for countless billions of eons of no time, for eternity, for no reason whatsoever, it's perfectly understandable to me that the thought might arise in my no mind, maybe I should do something. You say, why? Why not? Because you're God. You're always free. If you're God, there's never a loss of freedom. Freedom is your nature. Your nature is indestructible. And if you've been doing nothing for literally forever, it's reasonable that a thought might arise and maybe I should do something. But of course, in your profound and inconceivable equanimity, that thought passed away. And then after countless billions of eons of no time passed again, this thought may arise again in your mind and it would be released. But imagine this continuing to happen over inconceivable periods of no time whatsoever. This could build it on the surface of being. This could build a creative tension, could accumulate, slowly accumulate, slowly accumulate, slowly accumulate, building up, building up, building up, building up, building up, building up. Should I do something? Should I do something? Should I do something? I'm doing it. I let it happen. I let the universe explode into being. I did it. I let it happen. Why? Why not? Because if you're God and you're indestructible and fearless, there's no reason why not.
There are two dimensions we are bringing in here. One is called creation and other is called evolution. So both we are going by what we call so-called science, saying that billions of years back some creation happened. Okay, God created the universe in burst of creativity. Is one dimension. We'll explore that. Second dimension is that there's an evolution happened. As according to science, the evolution is a forces of nature where you are a product of what we call as survival for the fittest and a constant competition and race. What Andrew is bringing in is a dimension that is not just the competition or survival of the fittest. There's a divine dimension to evolution, where probably science did not touch upon the consciousness dimension to evolution. It brought in only the physical survival dimension. He is bringing in the dimension of the consciousness as a creative impulse, creative mechanism behind evolution, which gives us makes us a little bit better, feel better that we are not just robots surviving in this, or rather machines which are trying to survive, but there's something more to that than that. And we have we are a part of the bigger picture of God, creative impulse of God driving our evolution. So in a sense, I am feeling that Andrew is bringing in the consciousness dimension to the theory of evolution. Am I right?
Absolutely correct.
Okay. So that's actually for us that okay, but some of us survived the fittest ways, but it's like that's what he's trying to bring. Okay, but some of us okay. So the next dimension which is bringing, I would is there something more to that? What I understood?
There's more, but you understood it very well.
Okay. Yeah. What is that more?
that in terms of your question, there is you asked because in my understanding and my interpretation, in the leap from nothing to something, in the leap from being to becoming, there's with the burst from with the creative burst into energy and matter. This divine energy and intelligence, and this divine energy and intelligence could only, from the side of the time process at the very beginning, could only know itself within the ceiling or the limitation of the creative intelligence of energy and matter. In other words, we're going from absolute knowing in emptiness to relative knowing in and through form. So this knowing, it is said, goes all the way up and all the way down. So the interiority of an atom, we could say there's a measure of knowingness, of cognizance in the interior of an atom. And when an atom becomes a molecule, that capacity for knowing and cognizance complexifies ever so much. When a molecule turns into a cell, which means takes a leap from energy and matter into life, into very simple life, this cognizance complexifies and takes a leap. And when a cell becomes part of a body, part of a larger organism, and then especially when we're speaking about life, very simple forms of life have very simple capacity for knowing, for consciousness. It's very primitive. And as the complexity of the life form develops, as it continues to complexify, the capacity for interiority, for knowing, for consciousness itself within the context of life, the life experience, complexifies and complexifies and complexifies. So the extraordinary thing about being a human being, especially human beings at a very high degree of consciousness and complex cognition. The miracle from the perspective of evolutionary becoming for consciousness itself is that when a life form gains the capacity not only for knowing, but for self-reflective knowing, self-reflective awareness. Self-reflective awareness means not only that I'm aware, but I'm aware of the fact that I'm aware. In Buddhism, they call it Buddha nature. So the Zen master asks his student, does a dog have Buddha nature, which is awareness? And the student says, yes, the dog has Buddha nature because it has consciousness. Second question is, can a dog become enlightened? The answer is no, because a dog doesn't have the capacity to be aware of awareness. It's only when awareness gains the capacity for self-reflection that what we're calling enlightenment becomes possible, because enlightenment is when consciousness recognizes itself, and in that recognition there's dissolution, as we were speaking about earlier, this identification with the smaller separate self. So the miracle from the perspective of cosmic consciousness is that when a human being reaches this very high degree of development, that the energy and intelligence that created the universe, is creating the universe, for the very first time gains the capacity to awaken to itself, to recognize itself and realize itself through form. So the universe awakens through its own creations, which is us, and it becomes self-aware through us. And so from a certain perspective, we could say that God, or the energy and intelligence that created the universe, allowed himself or herself or itself to experience degrees of unconsciousness through the journey from energy and matter to life, to mind, to higher mind. So from the deepest depth perspective, from the perspective of the self that's never been born and never entered the stream of time, and has never thought of creating a universe and never did, none of this ever happened. Ever. 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 But from the perspective of the fact that it has happened and that it is happening, we're having this conversation about it. Because it would have had to have happened for us to have this discussion. And I do believe this discussion is really happening. This is my personal conviction. Not everybody might agree. Some people say, well, you think you're having this discussion, but it really never happened. This is all a dream in the mind of God. He's happily abiding in his samadhi. This is all just a dream. Don't you know it, you fool? Wake up! So it's my personal belief that that both these are two truths that are simultaneously true, and they, from my perspective, they have equal value. One is not better or more important than the other. They're both absolutely true, in my understanding. But as Prabhuji was explaining a few minutes ago, in this kind of understanding, from my perspective, this fully empowers, spiritually empowers the reality of incarnation, the fact of incarnation, the fact that you exist, the fact that I exist in this form and in this context suddenly now becomes spiritually and creatively and evolutionarily so potentially relevant if we wake up. If we realize who we truly are, if we wake up from the dream of the relative existence and realize our absolute non-relative divine identity, true self, then this body-mind personality is seen as a vehicle through which this creative intelligence can consciously create itself. And I personally believe this is what we were meant to finally we were meant to awaken to this truth, and in doing so we can consciously create the universe as the creator in the form of the body, in the form of the body, mind, and personality of our own unique self.
I'll take up one from what he said. So let us say I wake up. A dreamt character woke up. So then what is there is the person who is sleeping, not the dreamt character has disappeared. When I wake up from the dream, I no longer exist as a dreamt character. I am actually the original. When I woke up from as an individual, as a personal self, I woke up as a universal self or cosmic self or God. Now I cannot recreate the dreaming character. The dreaming character was all my dream. It just disappeared. So yesterday night I had a dream, and the dream character I can't recall. It's gone. So now I have realized there was never an evolution, there was never a creation, there was never a time, there was never a space. Now what is the role for me to participate in this evolutionary process?
None.
None. It's over. The game is up.
Yeah.
So once you wake up from the dream, you realize that there was never a creation, there was never a time, there was never a space, there never was a question also. So it is a sort of waking up from the dream. Okay. So coming back to the creation as such, the creation as per the Vedantic thought process, there is nothing called creation. Okay, there is a manifestation of what was in a subtle form, appears as a gross form, and possibly it happens moment to moment, not even at once upon a time. Not once upon a time in a billion years, it didn't happen. It is happening this moment because there is no concept of time and space in that cosmic self. For example, when I take a breath in, there's a life in me. The breath out, there's a death in me. In that moment, I am born. Along with me, the universe is also born. It's happening moment to moment rather than once upon a time. When a Big Bang happened, something happened. Rather, the Big Bang is happening at this moment to moment. And moment to moment, I'm appearing and I'm disappearing along with the universe. So, possibly for me, It never was a Big Bang. It's a Big Bang is also a part of the story, which is a part of time and space. The second part is what we call as there is never a creation actually. There is no objects. So when I see you, actually there's no you and me. There's only seeing. There's not even seeing. There's only knowing. There's no only knowing. It's only being, which means both of us don't exist in that sense. So the question always asks for a frame of reference. In that frame of reference, all answers are correct. But the moment you change the frame of reference, the questions are not relevant. The creation was never happened. There was no creation. There are no objects. There are no thoughts. The timeless, the ageless, the birthless is all that is there.
Also true.
Also true. So that's the moment you change the frame of reference of the question disappears.
Yeah. So one way I have to help clarify why that's the case is if we imagine this is a thought experiment to explain how can both truths be absolutely true. From my perspective, both are absolutely true. So we want to imagine the ocean is a metaphor for the timeless, formless, beginningless, and endless, eternal ground of all being. If we were so deeply realized, if we are awakening to this ocean of being, it was so profound that we were resting peacefully at the bottom of the ocean. Bottom of the ocean, there's no sound. You can't see anything. It's completely dark. It's full, and you can't see, and you can't see the surface of the ocean. There's only that. And there's no awareness of anything else. As we get, and also there's, as I was saying before, there's an inconceivable freedom because nothing exists and nothing has ever existed. But as we begin to approach the surface, suddenly a little bit of light appears. We can't see form yet, but you see a little bit of light appear. And you start to hear some vibrations where there's sound. You know, there's something happening up there. And if you keep approaching the surface, you start to be able to hear more and see there's more light, there's more commotion, there's more activity. And you suddenly reach the surface, and you bring your head above the surface, and you look around and you go, oh my goodness, there's an entire world with all kinds of things happening here. Now the ocean in this metaphor represents timelessness and formlessness. And in this ocean, literally, the universe hasn't been created yet. But when we reach our head above the surface, in this metaphor, you could say that our body is experiencing the freedom of the freedom of infinite being that exists before anything ever happened. While we lift our head above the water, there's a simultaneous awareness of the world of time and space and the entire creative process. And then someone can come along in a boat and say, "Are you okay?" So I'm fine. So come in the boat, so then they can pull us up out of the boat, onto the boat. And when they pull us up out of the boat, suddenly, the minute our feet are remove our feet from the water, simultaneously our awareness of timelessness and its inherent unimaginable freedom is gone, because now we're completely captivated by the world of time and form. And either we can stay in this boat and then go to the land, get off the boat, and then the drama begins. The drama begins. The story begins to unfold. Now you remember how that story unfolds depends upon how conscious you are. If you forget who you really are, you'll get lost in the dream. But it's my firm conviction that if you don't forget, or if you're living in the full cognizance of who you really are, you don't get lost in the dream, but you see that this is God's own dream. But it's real. So if you know who you are, you're not going to get lost there. You're going to realize who you are, and you're going to consciously create this world as his or her hands and feet, mind and body. Understand? You won't get lost. But if you the minute you get back in that boat and you go out to the middle of the ocean, you jump into the ocean, you go down to the bottom, it's all gone. It literally never happened. And the deeper you go into the ocean, it goes from being a dream. Oh, I thought it was real. Oh, it's just a dream. You keep on sinking deeper and deeper into the ocean. You literally forget at the bottom you literally forget it ever happened. And there's not even a thought that anything ever did happen. There's no thought about anything. So how all this looks depends upon where you actually are. How whether you have any knowledge of the ocean, whether you have direct experience of the ocean, and if you do, how deep is your center? How deep is where you are? Some people have some superficial knowledge of the nature of the ocean because their foot touched the water once, and that's a big deal. If your foot never touched the water, you don't know it exists. So if it does, it's a big deal. But there's a huge difference between your foot touching the water and you sinking to the bottom, being fully awake and fully conscious. So in that, the entire world, the world and everything in it, the creative process as a whole just completely disappears. But once you awaken to the creative process, in the context of full knowledge and cognizance of who you really are, in that wakefulness, in that enlightened awareness, you fully embrace the challenge of incarnation as the energy and intelligence that gave rise to it in the first place, and you know who you are now. So you're on a, in a sense, you could say you're a divine missionary. You're on a divine mission. You know who you are. You know why you're here, and you know from the perspective of absolute non-duality, because the absolute non-duality says and reveals to us that there is only one and not two. So if there is only one and not two, that means you and you alone are the only one who could have chosen to give rise to all of this. No one else could have done it. That means you and you alone. And we have to really have the courage, the metaphysical courage, to embrace this inconceivable truth that there is only one and not two. And therefore, I'm the only one that could have chosen to have done all of this, which means this is all me. And if it is, I'm responsible for all of it.
In other words, he's asking, you ask the question for yourself.
Why not? He's saying, why did you say why?
Why?
First he said, why not?
So,
Now he's saying, why did you say why?
He is saying, you are the best person to answer it.
I have a question for both of you. Both of you have the same understanding. So I come to Prabhuji's house, my Guruji's house, has been the domain of consciousness. I go back home, has been the domain of my ego.
That's too bad. I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah. So you are moving between, this domain of awakening versus domain of ignorance.
That's terrible.
So if you're in the bottom
Don't do
of
that.
ocean,
Don't do that.
exactly, you're in
You
the
shouldn't leave your guru's house. So the guru's house in reality is not a place in time and space, is it?
Yeah, it is not in time and space.
So if you truly come to the guru's house and recognize what it means, you should never leave.
The thing is, I think exactly what you said. You are in the bottom of the ocean, then you're on the surface. The surface is where the turbulence is, everything is.
Not only turbulence.
So there is beauty. There is creativity.
Beauty,
Yeah.
unspeakable beauty, inconceivable, God's creativity is inconceivable, unimaginable, beyond breathtaking. Look at the universe. Look at the creativity that's given rise to this universe, the creativity of the human body, the creativity of the human mind. It's not personal creativity, it's not my creativity, it's the creativity of God expressing himself or herself in and through human form. It's majestic. That's why when we hear beautiful music, when we see beautiful art, read beautiful literature, see beautiful architecture, it's the echo of the absolute, and it brings us to our knees.
Absolutely. So my question is this. How do you break this ego? I believe you are an ego killer. Good. So
Actually, there was recently in spiritual speaking to me. There was an article on breaking ego by
The day before yesterday.
yes,
Yeah.
it was very good.
Thank you.
I wish to hear from both of you. You know, like a seeker like here. What is the best way to break the ego? Quicker, faster.
Fast track approach.
So it's a practice. I mean, that's what you mentioned.
Well, I don't think we can break it. Breaking the ego, I don't think can really work. But we have to want moksha so badly that we allow ourselves, we give ourselves permission to be swept away by that. So for example, let me just answer this one question. Then. So when I met my guru, A.W.L. Punjaji, in 1986, I was one-pointed in my search for enlightenment. I'd reached that point in my life when I literally wanted nothing else. And I knew it, and I had no doubt about it. I was determined. I was going to succeed one way or the other. So I was sitting with him in his room, and he was sitting on his bed, and I was sitting on a chair. And I heard myself say the words, and I was shocked when I heard it. I'm ready to die, but I don't know how. But it wasn't Andrew saying those words. I didn't think I'm going to say these things to the master. I heard myself say these words, and I didn't even know where they came from. I was shocked because it was as if someone else was speaking through me. And in my terminology, that comes from what I call the authentic self. But what I'm trying to explain to you is it's not the self we believe ourselves to be under the hypnotic conviction that we are the small self. It came from a part of me that I didn't know, but that was closer to me than I could imagine. So I heard myself say the words spontaneously, I'm ready to die, but I don't know how. In the same way, after I left my guru and I was already beginning to teach, after 6 months, I came back to see him. And when I entered the room, the first thing he said to me is, I'm so glad you found a friend you're never going to be able to see. I'm so glad you found a friend you'll never be able to see. So, can you see yourself? Can you see yourself? No. You can't see yourself because you are yourself. You are the self. So, I don't think we can break the ego, but we have to be so desperate, I believe. We have to be so desperate and so earnest that we're willing to let go, allow ourselves to be swept away, to give it all to God in that sense. And we're really ready to do that. We're ready to die. Metaphysically, we're ready to die metaphysically. And in that there has to be a willingness to trust unconditionally, and that friend will never be able to see. The ego never trusts unconditionally. It always knows better about everything, and it's full of fear and doubt and mistrust. Getting to the point where we're willing to trust in that friend we're never going to be able to see is what makes it possible for the ego to fall away. And the thing is, the ego in most cases never permanently disappears, but it becomes sattvic because it becomes the less dominant structure in the self. Instead of being the dominant structure of the self, it becomes the weaker half, because now we've submitted to the deeper truth of who we really are. And this takes so much power away from the ego's identity. And if we're able to stabilize in that, the ego becomes, as my guru used to say, it becomes sattvic. But we can't break it because the ego's not interested in its own demise.
Yeah.
So the ego's never interested in this, and it never was. So what I encourage people to do is that the reason that you've come to your guru, and the reason that you come to your guru, is because the deepest part of yourself is awakening to itself, and you have to be willing to trust that in a way that the rational mind can't understand. Because the rational mind sits back and says, but I don't understand this. I can't see it. And if I don't understand it and I can't see it, it can't be real. But that part of the self can never see these things, can never know these things. And it takes most people a long time, if ever, to truly grasp something so subtle, so profound. So, as I'm sure Prabhuji speaks a lot about, it has a lot to do with releasing ourselves into not knowing, not always already knowing, which is ego death.
Sorry.
No, my question is existed.
Okay.
The
So,
identity is dissolved.
coming back to that answer, there's no need to drop the ego. Because ego is a shadow. Okay? Shadow has no existence actually. The shadow is the absence of light. Okay? The whole concept of dropping the ego is to chase the shadows, which will never succeed. You are giving importance to something which doesn't exist. They focus on what is real rather than focus what is not real. Shadow is not at all real. The constant focus should be the real self. When we say I, okay, the I has two components. There's a changing component of I. There's not changing component of I. The changing component of I is constantly changing. The changing component of I has the references body, mind, intellect, and the roles. Not a moment it's constant. It is constantly changing. But when you say I, 10 years back I was here, now I'm here, tomorrow I'll be there, the I has not changed. So in fact, really, you have never forgotten that you real I. Deep in your unconscious, the real I always is there. That's why always you claim that I was there, I was there. But if you look at your life, the body has changed, the mind has changed, the intellect has changed. And the changing part is what I call as ego. And not a single moment you can catch that ego, because the last ego, 2 minutes back, what was the ego? Now it's changed. So catching the ego and destroying the ego is catching the shadow, which will never work. So focus on what is real. And that real has nobody has to tell you. You already know, because you claim that 20 years back or 30 years back, I married that lady. Okay, that time you were younger and slimmer, and she was younger and slimmer. that is the part which is changing. But I has not changed. So go after that I. Once you go after that I, this unreal I will fall. So wherever our attention goes, we see that. For example, my attention goes to that light, I see the light. My attention goes to the book, I see the book. So our attention always should go to the real. Don't worry about chasing shadows. Don't worry about dropping ego. Focus on what is real. Unreal will get dropped. So the method of Vedanta for this is understanding what is real, what is unreal. A discriminative process. This is called Viveka. The teaching of what Vedanta I do is sharpen your discriminative ability. So the moment to moment you should be discriminate. And for your kind information, you have never forgotten I. Real I has never forgotten. The consciousness of Brahman is always there in your background, subconsciously, and all the time it's there. That's why it pops up. Every time when you say I, you say that real I. But every time you confuse with the body, mind, and intellect and mix with the shadow. So we don't have to drop shadow. We have to throw the light of discrimination, the wisdom on that shadow. The shadow will disappear. Focus on the real, don't focus on the unreal. Okay, it's like somebody saying, he went to a guru, I want to meditate. Then Guru told him, I want to meditate, I want to drop my ego. Okay, same question. So the Guru told him, fine, very simple. You go and chant a mantra. Okay, I'll give you a mantra. But when you chant the mantra, never think of a monkey. So the moment he goes there, sits there, mantra once, one monkey is sitting here. Next mantra is sitting here. Next mantra is sitting here. Okay, whole room is full of monkeys. So this is the process of chasing the ego. The moment you start thinking of ego, how do I chase the ego? You are actually going after monkeys. Don't go after monkeys. Catch hold of the real life, which you already know. Moment to moment, catch hold of the real life. The unreal life will get dropped.
Yes, nothing to add.
Okay. Anybody else has a question? Okay, so coming to realization, after realization, not before realization, I realized that there was never an individual called me. Okay, there was always only absolute. There was never an individual at all. It's only the pure consciousness which was there. The individual was a shadow. Okay, but while I am living, this shadow seems to be very powerful. I am living. I have a freedom. I have a free will. So I would say that there was never a free will. There is nothing called free will. And the free will is, again, like time and space, is another illusion which we are having as an individual person. So Ramana Maharshi says, somebody asked Ramana Maharshi, is there a free will? Ramana Maharshi said, yes. There is possible for you to become free from will. There is nothing called free will. So, what's your opinion on free will and destiny?
My opinion on free will and destiny. Well, evolutionary biology, the study of evolutionary biology, and integral psychology is continuing to reveal to us that human beings are even more conditioned at multiple levels simultaneously than we even previously understood, because we always knew that we were conditioned, but now the complexity and level of conditioning is even more than we previously understood. So we're conditioned by a lot. There's biological conditioning, emotional, psychological conditioning, cultural conditioning, religious conditioning, metaphysical conditioning. So in so many ways, so much of our experience is very mechanical. But in spite of that, I'm convinced that we all have a measure of freedom to choose. It's not a lot, but it's something versus nothing, and that's a big difference. So if we have no freedom whatsoever to make choices, then we are simply biological robots who either are living in ignorance or living in the divine recognition that we were never born and never entered the stream of time, therefore nothing ever happened, and therefore there's nothing we have to do about it. Or there's a recognition of the fact that we are biological life awakening to our own true nature, as this creative energy and intelligence. And in that, simultaneously becoming aware of the fact that how deeply conditioned we are, biologically, emotionally, and psychologically, culturally, metaphysically, in so many other ways. And through contemplative introspection, we can begin to become more and more aware of the multiple dimensions in which we are a bundle of condition. We all are a bundle of so much conditioning, and to the degree to which that's true, so much of our thought process, emotional process, life choices are usually not reflections of freedom, but reflection of conditioned responses in which there's almost no freedom at all. And there's no moksha in that. But I believe that we're not completely conditioned, that there's a measure of our awareness that's not, because, and it has to be true, because the degree to which we can bear witness to our own conditioning is inherently from a perspective or part of ourselves that's not conditioned. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to even be conscious or cognizant of the conditioning itself. So we have a measure of freedom to work with. We have to be very humble, because it's not a lot. But as we awaken to the truth of how deeply conditioned we are, biologically, emotionally, psychologically, culturally, and so many other ways, we need to work calmly and with dedication to expand that capacity of bearing witness to how deeply conditioned we are, and in that, slowly developing and cultivating capacity to make choices that are free from conditioning, and that simultaneously we have access to the inherent freedom of our own true nature, either as the self that's never been born and never entered the stream of time, or as the energy and intelligence, or as the energy and intelligence that created the universe, which is the evolutionary impulse. And so when this small measure of freedom to make choices is aligned with the evolutionary impulse, the choices we make, and the important choices we make, and the important actions we take become expressions of divine will. And there is a very profound difference in a human being who has awakened to this measure of freedom to choose, and has gone on to align that measure of freedom to choose with the creative impulse in the universe. There's a big difference between someone who's gone through that kind of transformation, that transition, to someone who is not. So I know that there's some, the materialistic science tells us that there's no such thing as free will. And also some teachers of radical non-duality teach us the same thing. But I respectfully hold my position that for all the reasons that I explained, we've been given the gift of a measure of freedom to choose. And part of our spiritual sadhana, as I understand it, a significant part of that sadhana, that spiritual practice, is learning how to cultivate patiently and consistently with great awareness and awakened intention to slowly cultivate this capacity to make free, not just free choices, but because when you say just a free choice, it means that the ego can do whatever it wants. It's not what I mean. It means a choice that comes from a deeper source. It comes from a deeper motive that has nothing to do with the ego. And I think a big part of this, the spiritual work, ongoing spiritual sadhana that we all have to do, is cultivate that capacity ongoingly, because we can all always, from a relative perspective, do more, become more liberated in our actions and in our choices. And that requires an enormous amount of dedication, commitment, because it's easier to say, there's nothing I can do. it's much easier just to let go into either from my perspective, from some kind of either materialistic belief that there's no such thing as free will, or a metaphysical conviction in the fact that the choosing faculty is always hopelessly lost in conditioning, and I don't believe that either. But relinquishing the overwhelming task of cultivating this measure of freedom we have to choose. So I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought, but I'm saying it's much easier to relinquish it because it's an incredibly huge burden of spiritual responsibility to work on this eternally. But I believe that's what sadhana is for. That's what sadhana is for.
Can I ask a question on that?
Sure.
The free will, in some sense, we can agree with respect to the past. In other words, many times in our life, we come to a cross point and we are given many alternative paths. And our past destiny makes us choose one of the paths given to us. So it is true that we didn't have a choice up to the point we came to that point. In other words, destiny brought us to the point where now it offers multiple choices. And we have free will at that point to choose again. We didn't have a choice to come to that point. That's true.
Well, we had as much of a choice as we had at the time. But hopefully, if we have evolved, learned, grown as a result of what's happened since then, now we have a greater measure of freedom to choose than we did then.
We get to the right path.
Well, there's no absolute right or wrong. There's no. We're talking about a relative context. So hopefully.
Let me ask again.
Sure.
At several points in our life, we face with a question: what path to choose? Right? There are always alternate paths. It is true that whatever we did in our past, our karma and past destiny, brings us to that point. So we can't change that. We didn't have a choice there. So our whole life stream has brought to that point. But at that point, again, we have a choice. There are several paths, and we choose to the extent we are awake, whatever we decide to follow a path, and that will decide our future destiny again. So it is like a series of points. At every point, we have a choice. But in the larger sense, our destiny determines where we are. But at a cross point, still we have a choice to take path A or B. Is it not true? In other words,
just repeat the question for recording's sake. Repeat
in other words, at the macro level,
Can you repeat it?
Yeah. His question is, the destiny brings you to at every point of time.
Yeah.
The destiny brings to you a certain place, and at that place you have branch off. Multiple paths available. You have a choice at that place. So the choice, the destiny, and the free will works simultaneously at a given every point of life. Is that question correct?
Yeah. In other words, at the macro level, it's true we don't have free will. Our life and the destiny flows in a certain way. But at several points in the micro level, we have a choice.
Exactly.
Right.
So was a very respected evolutionary thinker, Alfred North Whitehead, who said that every instant in time brings with it the potential for novelty. And in the creative process in years, every moment brings this opportunity for novelty. So the degree to which our mind and our self and our soul has been liberated from blindness, from unconsciousness, from conditioning, will be our capacity to recognize the potential for novelty in the next moment and the next moment and the moment after that. The degree to which we have not awakened from being completely blind and hypnotized by conditioning and by history will be the degree to which we don't recognize this potential for novelty. And a big part of awakening is recognizing that extraordinary potential for novelty, for newness, for the freshness of that which is new, how that's always available. And in an evolutionary understanding of moksha, that is the sweetest fruit is the direct cognition and knowing of that potential for novelty. And in the potential for novelty is not only liberation from our own ignorance and history, but is inherent in us the potential for the universe to create itself at a higher level of complexity through us. So either every moment is bringing with it an opportunity for novelty, or it isn't. And I believe that it definitely is. But I'm just repeating what I was just saying. But to what degree do we recognize that? And most of us are so lost, blind, so lost in the conditioning of the mind and the conditioning of the self, the small self, psychological self, that we don't recognize it. It's right there, but we don't see it because we're so hypnotized by the narrative and the drama of our psychological history, of our cultural history. We just can't see it. So wake up, that's not the only truth. And just like pulling someone's head up, say, don't you see what's there? And people say, no, and then they fall back asleep. This is the tragedy of ignorance. And we keep falling asleep. And to whatever degree we fall asleep, we're lost in the dream that Prabhuji is speaking about. And the dream is painful. It's spiritually stifling. It's spiritually stifling. And it suffocates the soul. And this is what often what happens so much is sometimes people awaken for a few brief seconds and then they fall back to sleep again. And the minute we fall back asleep, we lose touch with the awareness of the profound novelty, the opportunity for novelty and for creative potential that exists in every moment. So I don't see it as black or white, because in the way I hear your question presented, it's either one way or the other. And to me, that leaves out a lot of the complexity that inherent in all this. So in the same way, Prabhuji keeps saying, it was never really happening from the perspective of the deepest part of the self. In the same way, if this potential for novelty is ever existing as an absolute truth of every moment, that has greater reality and relative significance of our conditioned experience. And that's a big deal, because that means that we all have an opportunity in every moment for a liberated, deeply creative / liberated, deeply creative / liberated relationship to the challenge of being human. And that's the big opportunity. But we have to be careful not to overly, I mean, from my perspective, not to overly simplify the challenge.
Actually, so what you are saying, I want to understand. What you're saying is, in the presence, if you have awareness, there is a choice. But if you are in ignorance, you tend to go by your past filters, and therefore there is no choice. That's in the the whole thing is in the presence. Are you exercising your awareness, or you're deep in ignorance? Depending on that, you're saying there is a chance for free will to be
But it's not free will of the small self. It's not the free will of the small self.
Yes.
The ego says I can do anything and I want whenever I want to do it. That's the small self. That's not the free will I'm talking about.
So when
it's the free will of the self, capital S.
The awareness is not unfiltered, right?
No, but it's the free will of the self with a capital S that's been liberated.
So, just to ask, my ability to discriminate what action is driven by ego or it is not driven by ego, and based on the taking that action, is it a free will?
I don't think so.
Okay, I'll answer that question. See, the entire evolution which he's speaking of, okay, is evolutionary impulse. The entire evolutionary impulse, what science says, is the survival of the fittest. But really, evolutionary impulse is seeking happiness. The entire evolution of animals, living beings, everybody Okay, they are trying to seek happiness, greater and greater happiness. That's the impulse which is coming from the higher self, because happiness is the nature of the self. So our entire life is driven towards the happiness. Now, what gives me real happiness, okay, which gives me better and better happiness, is my learning. Okay, it takes time, effort, and lifetimes to become better and better. Now, at any point of time, I am confronted with a choice. Okay, so I have two paths to choose. So which one I will choose? I will choose one which gives me more happiness. My always question is, what gives me more happiness? Okay, my choice is always based on more happiness and less suffering. So that is the impulse which makes me choose. It's an evolutionary impulse. Now, over a lifetimes, incarnations, you have learned what doesn't work, and that is actually from unconscious you are moving to awareness. So if I have to make a really free will choice, so I don't have to make any choice because I am already happy. Happiness, I don't have to do anything. Real happiness, evolution impulse is happiness. Really, I have to make a choice. I will say I won't make any choice because my nature is happiness. Why should I make a choice?
Which means if I am unhappy, there is ego.
You are happy, also there's ego. So our choices are dependent on the evolutionary impulse called impulse, which is driving us, called happiness. So whenever you make a choice, you always choose between what gives more happiness. You make a choice, but this is still in the domain of your conditioning, because who makes the choice? I make the choice. Who is that I? A conditioned identity which has learned over a period of time how to make a better decision. Okay, so the identity is conditioned over a period of time. This didn't work, man. Last lifetime I got married. This time I won't marry, but I'll have a girlfriend. So that so all these decisions are strategy learned by the conditioned entity. Now, even if you, with all the choices you make, still you are conditioned only because you are making a choice without conditioning. So now the question is, can I jump from conditioning to unconditioning? Okay. So unconditioning is I don't do anything because I'm happy already. So I drop my decision-making process. So Ramana Maharshi says, whatever choices you make, be still in the domain of conditioning. But you have a choice to become free from the will, because now you are not longer choosing conditioning. You can choose your happiness, which is absolute. So, but that doesn't happen overnight. Okay, that is a real spiritual jump. So now everything in our life is a cause and effect conditioning. So from conditioning to unconditioning, how does it jump? Is it evolutionary instinct or is it grace? What is the role of grace and evolutionary instinct? This is the next question.
Is it like pulling a rubber band?
What is pulling rubber band?
It goes to one stretch, then you have to leave.
No. Question is who has to leave? See, because whatever your actions are within the conditioning only. So you have to come to a point. Okay. See, this is actually what. You have come to a point in spirituality. You are over a lifetimes. You have come to a point. You have tried every damn thing, and that damn thing you have learned. Now you come to a point. Enough is enough. He goes to Guru and says, I want to die. So you have come to the end of your experimentation. So, but till that point of time, all your decisions are conditioned. All conditioned decisions are in the domain of destiny. So then, when you want to give up, you're fed up with conditioning. So you want to give up. That is the point you surrender. That's what means we surrender. I want to die means, when he says that, I want to die means I want to surrender. Now, no longer decision making is conditional. So you have tried out everything, including the social life, spiritual life, all sadhanas you have practiced. And you have come to a point, yes, beyond this I can't go. That's the point a real surrender happens. And that real surrender, you drop all conditioning and the unconditional pull you pull up. That's what I call grace.
I agree.
So
then I have the question which you are saying that when there is a choice, when a choice is being made by me, it is not the small I, but the small self, but the big self. That I'm choosing the choice of the big self. That's what
You're allowing.
Huh?
Allowing.
Not choice.
I'm
not
allowing-
making
allowing.
a choice, but allowing.
I'm allowing the choice of the.
You're allowing the big self to be the doer.
to do whatever.
That's what he's saying is okay. So that's where.
And therefore,
I
he
didn't
said
mean
it's
that.
not
Is that what you are saying?
I didn't mean that.
That's what I want to know.
So,
No, because Prabhuji's emphasizing that nothing's happening. I'm emphasizing that something's happening.
Perfectly right. But I wonder why your subject, I am, who's the I there and who's the I here?
I mean, I think that we're fundamentally agreeing, but we're holding a slightly different perspective, but we're fundamentally saying the same thing. But the most important thing in relationship to the choice issue is that the freedom of choice that I'm speaking about is not the freedom of the ego to make its own choices. So when we relinquish the ego's need to be the one who's in control, to be the doer, this deeper, what I call the authentic self, comes to the front. And the authentic self has a completely different agenda, completely different motives that are not self-serving, that are inherently not self-serving, that are inherently altruistic. And the awakening to that authentic self is the experience of freedom. But that chooser is not personal. It's not a personal self. It's not the unique dominion of you or me. It awakens this function, this capacity awakens in anybody who's able and willing to let go and to surrender the small self. Yeah, but then the authentic self is coming from the source. That's the source. For example, when a guru speaks, a real guru is awakened to the source or to the self. The self speaks through them as them. And there's an awakened motivation in that self, an awakened compassion, and an awakened evolutionary motive that speaks through the body, mind, personality, and the appearance of the small self of that individual, which now has been displaced by the source of the true self. So, does what I'm calling the authentic self, which speaks from the source, have free will? Not really, which is, I think, what you meant.
yeah.
That's
Okay.
all.
Which I think what you meant. It has no choice. It has no choice.
He's only looking at the authentic self all through.
Yeah, but listen.
Whereas we are looking at both.
Yeah, but listen. But it has no choice. But from the perspective of the small self, of the relative self, it looks like a choice. But it becomes, from the liberated perspective, it's a choiceless choice.
So you have apparent choice, believe you have a choice, and work accordingly, and whatever you do will be according to your destiny.
The small self made a claim, I made a choice.
You can make a claim, okay, for whatever is happening through you. So I'll give just normally an analogy I'll give. Somebody is sitting near an ocean. Okay, waves are rising and falling, and he has a stick in the hand. Up, 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 down, 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 and he has a big mush. People come and ask him, "What are you doing? Don't you see? I am commanding the ocean. See, up, 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 up. Wave is rising. Down, 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 down. Wave is falling." So that is the choice which a small I has.
There's the ocean management I see.
Ocean management that you see very well in the corporates.
Actually, if you really see that till that peak point, that realization takes place, there is free will. Because there is some amount of discrimination that one has to apply based on his past. But once the total surrendering happens, there is no freedom.
So no, but the thing is that actually is driven by it's not a free will, I'll say. It's an evolutionary impulse.
Yes.
The evolutionary impulse is mechanical force. which is pushing you moment to moment for more and more happiness. Okay, so that is not your choice. Even if you say the happiness, the evolutionary impulse is there. It makes every moment you make a choice, and always you evaluate. I have two choices, which is better, which is better. Now you call it as free will.
Yes.
So you are driven by completely evolutionary impulse called happiness. Okay.
And I'm thinking I'm moving the stick up and down.
Up and down.
And based on that,
So all the while, the entire evolutionary impulse is driving your every decision making, every single step. And finally, it will come to the same evolutionary impulse will take you to a point where no more decision can be made. So that's why you say, oh my God. Sorry. Okay, so I'll just put one more. So,
I have a question.
yes, sir.
Why are you equating evolutionary impulse as a necessary requirement for happiness? Where is happiness equivalence there? There's an impulse.
Yes, every choice we make is based on happiness. Actually, decision.
You're making an axiom, you're making a statement. Correct. So, happiness is desired, or happiness is defined by the small I.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
But now I'm at the big S.
What is biggest? Self.
Big self. Big self. I have no choice but to become. That means the impulse is to do something, otherwise I'm quiet. So I'm not even worrying about whether it's going to be happiness or sadness. I have no idea. I'm just doing it because that is my nature to do. Okay, because I cannot, quote unquote, I cannot sit quiet. Like 4.3 billion years ago or 14 billion years ago, God did not want to sit quiet. He just got that impulse to do something. He did not know whether it's going to be happier or sadder. So I have reached a level of, let's call it ultimate consciousness. Let's not use the word grace. Grace means somebody has to give it to me.
Yes.
Consciousness means I have evolved to a level where I just do. I'm not asking for happiness. It is just my job is to do. Without expecting a return on investment.
That's what I'm saying. Are you speaking from the smallest or biggest perspective?
Because I've already reached the biggest.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay.
So
that's,
that means
that
free will is, there is only one free will, which is to do.
No, I'm saying, but there is no doer. The problem is there's a do, but there's no doer. So the whole question of identity and lack of free will comes from the doership. So now when you reach this stage, you are already become biggest. There's no concept of doership.
But who is to judge me? I'm the one who has to judge myself.
There's no judgment, because there's no judgment, there's no doership. There's action.
That's
The
right.
action is without a doer. Thinking without a thinker. Experiencing without an experiencer. So when you have reached the stage, you already become biggest. There's no question of free will or no free will at that point.
There's no need for a definition of free will at
No,
that point.
we are speaking of a definition of free will just before that. How do you read that point is the question. So when you say enlightenment, there's an experience without an experiencer, doing without a doer, thinking without a thinker, knowing without a knower, and complete freedom from the effects of the what you are doing. So now if you have reached the stage, you are already biggest. Then the embodiment complex is just an instrument of the authentic self. So there is no longer you as an individual, smallest. The whole question of destiny versus free will comes for a smallest, not for the biggest.
To ask again the same question, even for a fully awakened soul like Ramana, let's say, as long as he's in body, mind, and life, moment to moment there is always choice.
Yes.
Even the simple what food to eat,
Yes.
whether to go to direction A or B.
Yes.
So that choice is always there, and that soul has to decide. In that sense, free will is there.
So that question I'll answer.
Yeah.
For an enlightened being, let us take the example of Sri Ramana Maharshi. He has to take a day-to-day decision making. The doing has two components: the conceptualizing and doing. The conceptualizing brings the doership. Okay, doing brings the action. So in the case of enlightened soul, the conceptualization function has gone. So I am doing is gone, but action is required. Whatever action is required for that moment is happening without a doership. So that action is appropriate to that moment without exercising a choice. And that action is called enlightened action. Actually, in my opinion, there's nothing called enlightenment. There's only enlightened action. Once you become enlightened, that's it. The concept of individual entity collapses. The doer, thinker.
But still choice is there.
No, the choice is for an entity, but there's no entity there. That conceptualizing entity is missing. So Ramana Maharshi, if you ask him, he says that's what has to happen. So his question, his answer will be always, it's a happening rather than I'm doing.
So probably his question is there a small I, small s, and also the authentic self together coexist?
No. The smallest when we speak of, the smallest is always an entity which is a product of memory. Okay, I am so and so, I am doer. For example, when the child kicks a father, child has no doership. Okay, it is just action happening through body-mind complex. Enlightened soul, action is happening through the body-mind complex, and that action is called naishkarmya, a non-doership. In that non-doership, there's no concept of I am doing and I am exercising free will. Whatever is appropriate for that moment is happening through that. And now, who is doing that? There's nobody. It's a consciousness operating through the body-mind complex.
So there is no S. Whatever is happening is just happening.
Yeah, if he has exercising his free will, actually he is an enlightened being by definition. He has become free from sankalpa and vikalpa. Okay, sankalpa and vikalpa is a property of an individual. Now, if he has not, he still has sankalpa vikalpa, he is not at all enlightened. The moment you drop sankalpa vikalpa, there is a person, entity who exercises that free will is gone. So now what's happening is, as per the universal consciousness is there on the body-mind complex, whatever has to happen, the functioning consciousness will take care of that. But conceptualizing consciousness is gone. I am the doer, I am doing, I am exercising free will. No. For example, Ramana Maharshi had to undergo surgery. Very painful. Anesthesia was, without anesthesia, I had to undergo surgery. Or I said, if I have a free will, I said, no, I don't want to. So what happens is that we have to understand that the entity is a product of memory past. And whole process of enlightenment dissolves that entity, and the conceptualizing part goes, functioning part remains, because body-mind complex is running. So heart beats, the kidney operates, all those things will be, and the brain works. And whatever is appropriate for that moment is the right action will happen. That's my understanding of an enlightened being like Ramana Maharshi.
But in the meantime, the reason I say the meantime is it's very rare that the small self falls away that degree. Hardly ever happens. It's an act of nature, in my opinion. It's nothing we can do. So therefore, for us mere mortals, who also are striving to become enlightened beings, we have to come up with a conceptual framework so we can become enlightened and still take responsibility for the unenlightened parts of the self all at the same time.
So although there is no effort, what you're saying is there should be an attempt on your part to do the effort.
Well,
to do the effort to reach,
well,
to drop yourself or to surrender.
Let me put it this way: it's a little bit more interesting than that. So I've come up with a way to think about it that I think is helpful. So let's say for this example, let's say the sum total of who you are, who I am, let's say it's 100%. This is a very simplistic way to think about it. So it's very reductionistic, so I apologize for that at the beginning. But I'm just doing it to make a point. So who has dominion over the body, mind, and personality? Who has dominion over this? So for the quote-unquote unenlightened person, it's going to be the fears and desires of the unenlightened self. The fears and the deeply conditioned fears and desires of the unenlightened self. So if you observe the behavior of such a person, they're complete robots, they're conditioned robots, more or less. But in such an individual, for some karmic reason, from some positive karma, good karma, there's a spark the spark of consciousness. The person goes, oh my God. And they see it. They realize that's who I really am. That's the truth of who I really am. So the spark is seen. And after that spark is seen, instead of the body, mind, personality being completely dominated by and in control of the deeply conditioned fears and desires of the small self, there's a spark of knowledge, self-knowledge. And self-knowledge is inherently free from conditioning. It's inherently liberated. So let's say the spark now is 3% out of 100. So that means now that the individual's 90, remember, this is a very primitive model, so forgive me. So let's say the body, mind, personality now is under the dominion of 97% of ignorance and conditioning, 3% liberated awareness. So you're not going to see much change, but something profound has shifted. Let's say the person does sadhana, meets a guru. Meets the guru, they have a profound experience when they meet the guru, they continue their own personal sadhana. The 3% starts going from 5%, 10%, 15% of consciousness now is permanently awakened within the body, mind, personality of such an individual. This is an enormous shift. Now the person knows that the self with a capital S is his or her true self. And even though they're still fundamentally dominated by their own ignorance and their own deep conditioning, they know through all of it that there's a deeper reality, but they're not able to act as that yet because they're still fundamentally trapped. But when as a result of continued interaction with the guru, continued sadhana, the 15% goes to 20, 25, 30, 35%. This self, capital S consciousness, grows and deepens. It goes 35, and it keeps developing 35, 40, 45%. Now the person can speak very eloquently about enlightenment, about the difference between the small self and the big self, but the person's not free yet. Because still, at 55% of the dominion of the body, mind, personality is still from the unenlightened, conditioned self. And the big transition point happens when the shift of dominion over the body, mind, personality goes from 49 to 51%, when there's that shift. And when the consciousness has been awakened to 51, to not less than 51%, there's a shift. And now there's a fundamental position, knowledge of unconditional absolute freedom as who I am, as what the truth is. Even though there's still 49% of conditioned ignorance, blindness, and unconsciousness, instincts, and ego. More than half of who we are knows what the truth is and is abiding in and as that truth. And the minute there's this shift from 49 to 51%, we become a different person, because the choosing faculty now is being informed by what I call the authentic self. We're calling the true self here. And such an individual begins to animate, transmit, vibrate with the truth of who they really are, however imperfectly. And then, as this process would continue, we go from 51 to 55 to 60 to 65%, and this is quite a bit. I mean, we're talking about being realistic here. This is not just some idealistic fantasy, because but such a thing is actually possible. When we think about the possibility of moksha, I believe anybody who is absolutely, deadly, completely serious, which most people are not anywhere near being, it's possible to reach this. It's possible to reach this 51% transition point, which changes nothing less than everything. That doesn't mean we're fully enlightened after that, and I personally am skeptical about the idea of being fully anything, because in an evolutionary context, which is different than an Advaita context, the developmental potential in human beings is always more than it could be, more than it is now, no matter who they are. But that's another discussion for another time. But I think if we're going to take the idea of moksha seriously, we have to realize that an example like Ramana Maharshi, for example, and other Jivan Muktas like him, Avaduts, are, in my opinion, freaks of nature. They are spiritual prodigies of the highest order that became, as they became the expressions of liberation that were due to forces that are beyond the mind's ability to understand, in my opinion. So we want to strive to, we want to use them to inspire us. But I think the profundity of their attainment mustn't inhibit our own willingness to take our own potential for profound liberation very, very seriously. Understand that? The profundity of their attainment, the rarity of it and its uniqueness mustn't intimidate our own belief in our own capacity to become profoundly awake and deeply enlightened human beings with enormous power to affect good in the world as a result of that enlightenment.
I agree with you. He is saying Olympic runner can run a marathon in this thing. Now, never compare yourself to Olympic runner. You are actually, we are running here. So, Ramana Maharshi should inspire us. Buddha should inspire us. But let us not compare with their achievement with our this thing. Where we are, we'll continue and reach what we can.
We should run to
Our capacity. Don't get me shocked by their.
And therefore, you say, I can't run and stop.
I can't run and stop. So I think we are approaching the session. Actually, we didn't know how the time passed, so we went beyond time and space.
What time is it now? How much time? How much? No time has passed.
Guess. So we are approaching the timeless. We are approaching 8:59.
I didn't feel the passing of time.
Pass it on.
Does everybody know why we didn't feel it? That's just a serious question. Because when in the presence of the Guru, no, if the Guru is truly abiding in the self as the self, then as Prabhuji was saying and I was saying, that's that dimension of reality. There is no time. So when you're awake or in the consciousness of timelessness, one literally does not feel the passing of time as one ordinarily does when one is not in that awakened feel of timelessness, and it's a tangible experience. So, for example, in the entire time we've been talking, I wasn't aware of time passing at all. So I'm surprised.
So we have gone into a dimension of timeless, spaceless, thoughtless space. It's time to come back to time, space, and Maya.
Even though it doesn't really exist.
It doesn't really exist. So one last question, anybody? Okay, I will ask the last question. People speak of enlightenment experience. Okay, our books are full of miraculous, marvelous stories of enlightenment experience, so much of awakening, so much of experience. Okay, so what is your experience of enlightenment?
My experience of experience.
No, I'm saying when these experiences are there, actually they will start sometimes motivate people. Sometimes they will start craving for that experience. Sometimes they will wait for an event of enlightenment to happen. Okay, so it's like whatever is the experience written through books, stories. They become sort of either motivator or demotivator. I have not got that experience.
So what's the question? Sorry.
So the question is, what is an enlightenment experience? Is there an enlightenment experience?
One-time experience.
Is it one-time experience? Is it multiple experiences? Is there an experience called enlightenment?
All are true. They're all actually true, paradoxically. Because in the experience, you realize the truth that you were never born, that you never entered the stream of time. You realize that anything that can happen in time is mortal and therefore is not the truth. And at the same time, these experiences really do happen. So both are true. And I think that I think powerful experiences, transformative experiences, are very important because they give us motivation and absolute confidence in absolute reality. And so without these experiences, we're never going to be able to be free from doubt. But at the same time, after we've had 1, 2, or 3 of these very powerful transformative experiences, but when I mean very powerful transformative experiences, I mean really very powerful transformative experiences. The kind of experiences that sweep you off your feet, that convince you beyond any doubt that the mind is an illusion. And then you're experiencing the reality of what people like the Buddha were pointing to. Then you know from your own experience that it's real, that it's not imaginary. But at a certain point, we have to let go of the need to have more experience. After we've become convinced by profound and powerful transformative experience, we have to grow up and realize, now I know what the truth is. And then we let go of the need to have more experience. And we stop being spiritual beggars. Please give me more, because how much is enough? because the point is not just to have more experience so we can be convinced yet again, but to become an exemplar to the best of our ability in all our imperfection, to be radiant expressions of that divine reality and that divine truth in all our imperfection in this world. And in order to do that, we have to be able to let go of needing God to reveal himself or herself yet again and more and more and more. We have to let go of being a beggar. We say, thank you, now I know. Now I have no doubt. You are everything and I am nothing. And then we don't need to have more experience, and then at that point, the experience itself will start coming through us, not for us, but for other people, for other seekers.
It's like saying, you got to be rich to know that their money is valuable.
So actually, enlightenment is not an experience. Okay, in the sense, everything, all the experiences belong to the domain of mind. What comes and goes, momentary, is a motivator. It can be very powerful, transforming, but enlightenment itself is not an experience. Because you are not an experience for yourself. You are what you are. The self is what it is. Okay? And the only experience we have in life is always about the self. Every other experience is through mind and body, which is indirect. So the enlightenment or recognizing myself is not an experience. It's dropping of other experiences. Okay? So not giving importance to other experiences, recognizing my own true nature as the self is not an experience. It's a objectless cognition, and it's happening every moment. Actually, it's happening. The only thing is we are overwhelmed by the other experiences. So that the dropping of the other irrelevant experiences, shifting our attention to what I am now, is enlightenment. It's not an experience because you are already always in the waking state, dream state, deep sleep state. You are already that. So it cannot be a new experience, but it is all other experiences which are masking that, shadowing that. You have to start ignoring so that your attention shifts to the real self, authentic self. So from that point of view, I will not say enlightenment is a big event. It's a shifting of attention from the irrelevant experiences to the relevant experience, which is already there in the background all the time. So that's what I call as enlightenment, if at all it's the experience. Now, once you do that, what will happen? Your individual self, which was craving for small experiences, big experience, small experience, all experiences. So that is no longer craving because it has found the source. Okay. So now that small self is no longer there. It is the largest self. So now, whatever is happening is everything when you transact in the world, every moment there's an experience. Every experience is divine experience, but there's no experiencer. Every thinking, there is a thinking, but there's no thinker. There's doing, but there's no doer. There's experiencing, but there's no experiencer craving for more experience. Everything happens moment to moment. So thinking, doing, functioning, feeling, emoting, everything without an entity. So that is actually the final experience. So in the first experience where you are experiencing yourself, I am. Okay, it is not an experience because it's already there. You are recognizing it. Okay, I am the reality. So that's not an experience because it's already there in all the background. Self is always only thing which is there. Always is the self. So what is there with you is not a new experience. So you are recognizing that. So then whatever small thing you are experiencing in the world, okay, that also self-experiencing itself, because there's nothing other than self. So when I talk to you, when we eat fruit, when I see a mango, there's an experience, but there's no experiencer. There's nothing but self-experiencing itself in the domain of Maya. So there's only experience of self remains, but they are not fantastic or magical or magnificent. Simple, every experience of life transforms into divine experience without an experiencer.
Amen.
So this is just to remove the concept that we are actually crave for such and such experience, some light coming. All those things are okay, but everything belongs to the domain of mind. Self is not experience, because self is what you are. Recognize it. That's all. Finished. Matter is over. Okay. So with this, we are coming to the conclusion of this session. We thank Sri Andrew Cohen.
Thank you so much.
And his wife, and Dr. Shankar and his wife, for facilitating this, coming here and taking us beyond time and space. Now it's time to go back to time and space. So let us spend 5 minutes in silence and close this session. Okay. Then I will have dinner. Just switch off the lights, please.